Wilhelm Reich was a psychoanalyst who trained with Freud. He was an associate of Freud's, of that wonderful generation of psychoanalysts who had been under the tutelage of Freud, like Jung, Reich himself, Adler, these people who came up in that generation. Really, some I think the most creative psychoanalytic thinking ever, before psychoanalysis was taken over by the pharmaceutical industry.
Amen. What a sad devolution.
It is. Anyway, so what happened with Reich though is Reich he was eventually arrested. He said, allegedly, discovered this energy, which he called Orgone energy.
I've read a lot about that.
Which is a kind of a life energy. And he connected it to, or initially where he started with this was in his work in sexuality and sexual repression, which he saw coming out of the Freudian school of psychoanalysis, that it so sexual repression would lead to psychological problems, which we know that's true, right?
Yeah.
And so absolutely true. And so he was trying, and he wrote a book, I think it came out in 1928, called The Function of the Orgasm, really trying to understand this and understand what we do to ourselves in our sexual lives. It was eventually arrested.
Stuff about him from kind of a Catholic apologetics take.
He would often touch his female patients and masturbate them. In fact, out of his 4 wives, I think 3 of them were his friggin' patients.
But what I think is interesting with him is one of the things he came up with, which I think is a really fascinating idea, is this idea of armoring. That that beings or organisms, we could say, in hostile environments acquire armor.
They certainly
protect
do.
themselves from that hostile environment. So looking at the example of the desert. So
I'm thinking armadillos, cacti. I'm thinking of lots of other insects that are pretty well armored.
And they all have armor, right? They all have tough skins with spikes and stuff, right? To protect the inside. Which is soft, like cactus, right? So by analogy, he said, now look at people who grow up in hostile environments. What do they get like? They get armored as well.
Absolutely.
Right? Hard on the outside, trying to protect something. And so one of his goals in psychoanalysis was to help people de-armor. Right? To de-armor. And he would even, one of the points in Peter Reich's book, Reich would often push against Peter's stomach to see that he wasn't tight and hard, that he could be open and free-flowing, which is kind of an interesting thing, right?
What do you think about just one thing? Right now, when there's this huge call for resiliency training, right? Do you see those as a pendulum swing, or maybe working on 2 different tracks? Because we're both kind of can see roles for both of those. There's no doubt. But could a society become so disarmored right now that people are asking to like?
No, our society is hyper armored.
I think it's armored. Yeah,
hyper armored. I think that's what happens with propaganda programs and mass formation.
Maybe like the internet. The internet could have been liberating, and it can also become of totalizing control. That an expression of sexuality can be liberating. The opposite of repression could be expression, but that expression could be channeled or dissipated. And the worst could be the corruption of the best. And we know that libido dominandi, like when they just get you addicted to sex, they can lead you any which where. And we're definitely living in a time where that second one is true, enslaving people to pornography and everything else.
And that's the thing is, unless we become liberated in our own thinking and being, we're subject to slavery of any kind. I mean, for as far as I'm concerned, some kind of radical traditionalists, tradie Catholics are just as enslaved as anybody who's addicted to pornography, though it might be a healthier slavery. But it's not ultimately healthy, because then then it leads into the pre-sexual abuse scandal, right?
Absolutely. You'd see some convents where you had so much repression, then a wave of liberation came in. But again, it was so built up that it was not channeled. Everybody in every convent was sleeping together in seminary and everything like that. This is tricky stuff, but the answer isn't continued massive repression.
Yeah, and as you mentioned the other day, you were talking about your friend who was talking about the seminaries and the priesthood and how many repressed homosexuals are inhabiting that space, which I know from experience because one of the parish priests at my church when I was a kid, I was an altar boy for this guy, was one of the most notorious child predators in the Catholic Church's history.
Yeah.
No, he likes boys, Mom. Cut it out. Boys, you can't talk about him like that. He's a priest. Mom, I'm telling you right now, he does. He asked my friend for a massage. No man does that.
Right.
And then, Mike, did you see this? What? Yeah. Father Shirilla is going to prison because he's been sexually abusing boys. I said, Mom, I told you that 20 years ago.
Yeah.
But I couldn't believe you because he was a priest.